Hello and welcome to the Alphagenix Podcast, where we discuss all things health and hormones. I'm Dr. Max, lead clinician at Alphagenix, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Jenny Goodman, who is a qualified medical doctor and practitioner of ecological medicine. She's also an author of two fascinating books, which I've been trying to delve into. And she has a specialist sort of interest, I would say, in nutritional and environmental medicine. And she's been in this area for, I believe, over 20 years. And I'm delighted to have her on the podcast. Welcome, Jenny.
Over 25 years, I'm afraid.
Oh, is it? It's crept up. Yeah.
It does.
Well, Jen, pleasure. Well, tell me your backstory as to, because we were talking just before offline about how this area in the UK in particular is not such a big space as perhaps it should be. How did you end up getting into this area of medicine?
Well, it's growing rapidly, but it was non-existent when I first discovered it. So backstory really, I guess, begins when I was 7 and had quite a serious asthma attack and was taken to my GP. Now, in those days, GPs did real medicine. It's the sort of thing that now you'd go to A&E for. But my parents just took me to the GP, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I'd been dancing and singing with a group of kids, and I just almost collapsed. So the GP gave me an injection of adrenaline. That was all. And I could breathe, I could chatter, and I looked at him like he was a god. And in that moment, I thought, I want to do that. When I grow up, I want to work miracles like that. Of course, fast forward about 60 plus years, and I would say, yep, conventional medicine is still very, very good at emergencies. It's very good at accidents and emergencies and increasingly problematic with everything else. But I went to medical school at the age of 18, 19, very idealistic. Okay, I wanted to learn how to heal the sick, obviously, but also why people got sick. And if we learnt the causes, I assumed we could do preventive medicine and stop people from getting sick in the first place. So I went through my 6-year training asking questions, usually questions beginning with why. I never got any answers. And in fact, if you ask on the wards why this illness happened, you get frozen. There was complete silence, which said to me, this is not a question we ask. So I did work as a junior hospital doctor for a while. I enjoyed working in emergency medicine most because they were doing good stuff there. But I couldn't find a way to practice that felt it was really doing more good than harm. So what I saw was desperately sick people brought into the hospital who'd clearly been getting sicker for years and decades, and nobody had, intervened at an earlier stage. So in one sense, I felt all hospital medicine was emergency medicine. Long story short, I didn't find answers to my questions at those points, but I got, in a sense, sidetracked, although now I can see it wasn't a sidetrack. I was asked to teach conventional medical sciences like anatomy, physiology, pathology, and so on, to practitioners of alternative medicine. So people who are studying in colleges of homeopathy, acupuncture, osteopathy, herbal medicine, and so on. So I did that for quite a long time. I also taught women's health, politics of health, alternative medicine in adult education classes, because in the 80s and 90s, adult education was still flourishing and affordable. And then I did a complete sidetrack. I went and did a master's degree in psychotherapy and counselling, and I practiced that for some time. And I really thought my days as a medic were over and that I couldn't find, anything to do in medicine that I could truly, deeply believe in. And then everything changed in the late 90s when I was lucky enough to discover what's now called the British Society for Ecological Medicine. Now, this is a bunch of doctors, mostly disillusioned ex-GPs, who had all the same questions I had throughout medical school, but unlike myself, had found answers and ways to work with sick people and people who wanted to stay healthy without using drugs. So most of what medicine does is drug medicine. And if you look at the names of the major categories of drugs, you notice they all begin with anti. You've got antibiotics, antidepressants, antihypertensives, anti-epileptics, anti-inflammatories, anti. You're working against the body's processes. And what I learned from my wonderful colleagues in the British Society for Ecological Medicine was there is a way to get alongside the body, work with it, strengthen the immune system, sort out the digestive tract, which is the root of so many of our problems, sort out the microbiome, which I call in my first book our trillions of tiny companions, our TTCs. But most of all, to ask the question, what's the good stuff that's missing? And putting it back is nutritional medicine. And what's the bad stuff that's got into people? And that is environmental medicine. In other words, environmental toxins from our environment, of which we have created hundreds of thousands, these artificial synthetic chemicals, since the Industrial Revolution, which was only 200 odd years ago. So a fraction of time in the timeline of our evolutionary history. And these are in the air, the water, the soil, the food. We'll come to what they are and how to avoid them and how to detoxify them later, I'm sure. But realizing they're there, learning to avoid them and developing techniques for removing them from the body and from our lives, all that's the environmental medicine half. And putting the good stuff in, the nutrition with both diet and supplements, is the nutritional side. But they're two sides of one coin, really, because toxins do a lot of their damage by acting as anti-nutrients, and nutrients do a lot of their good by getting rid of toxins. So the reason that this whole practice of nutritional and environmental medicine, the reason it's called ecological medicine, and I'm so lucky I discovered it. Found the people who had discovered it. It's ecological in two senses. In one sense, it sees the body, the whole human body, as one joined up ecosystem. In contrast to orthodox medicine that has a department for the liver and a department for the spleen, department for the skin, department for the kidneys, department for the lungs, it's so segmented that there's no one who can see the whole picture. And if you go to your standard GP with, painful joints, they'll send you to the rheumatologist. Difficulty breathing, they'll send you to a respiratory physician. And gut pain, diarrhea, constipation, they'll send you to a gastroenterologist. But one person may have all those three problems, and those three specialists will never sit in a room together and figure out what is underlying all those manifestations, the symptoms that are appearing in three or more different systems of that person's body. So as opposed to fragmented medicine, ecological medicine just sees the whole body as one joined up ecosystem. That's how we work. But it's called ecological medicine for another reason as well, which is that it sees the human being within the wider system that is planet Earth. And we are totally, inextricably embedded in that ecosystem of our mother, the Earth. We are no way separate from it. The attempt over the past couple of hundred years to separate ourselves from it and dominate it has been clearly disastrous, but on quite a literal physical level as well. We drink the water, we breathe the air, we eat the food that's grown in the soil. And, as I'm always saying, you can't poison the planet without poisoning the people. But it's perfectly possible to unpoison both and heal ourselves. And healing ourselves and healing the planet are really the same project. So that's what ecological medicine is about.
What was it you mentioned there? I mean, that's a great explanation of how you kind of diverted your career almost, in a sense. And you had that moment when you were a child where you looked at the doctor and said, actually, I like this sort of stance in life to try and help people. Was it a particular moment in your career where you were looking at people coming into hospital sick, you were doing a lot of emergency medicine, and was there one case that stuck out, or was it just the general feel of it where you just kept feeling like, hold on a minute, we're at the end of a story here, we're not looking at the beginning, we're not looking at the first few chapters, we're looking at the sort of last conclusion?
That's a really good question. I think the answer is, in medical terms, both acute and chronic. There were a couple of really amazing light bulb moments, but there was also a daunting realization that something was wrong and something was missing, although it was years and years before I could name what was wrong and what was missing. So I would say the first 2 years of medical school, you just learn anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, microbiology, pathology, which is what diseased tissue looks like under the microscope, and pharmacology. And that's called preclinical. That's 2 years. And some of it was fascinating, some of it was boring. It was all incredibly hard work. But throughout that 2 years, I was saying to myself, okay, in the third year, you begin your clinical training and you will be learning how to heal. You'll be working with real patients. So I was holding my breath in a way, waiting for the third year to begin. And within weeks of that third year beginning, I would say I was devastated with disillusion because we weren't actually applying the science we learned. We were just learning a long, long list of diseases and a list of symptoms and signs that identified the diagnosis, followed by what's the prescription? What drugs do you give? Or what surgery do you perform? And I would differentiate those because surgery can sometimes be curative. Drugs very rarely are. The body knows how to heal from a physical wound better than it knows how to heal from ongoing chemical poisoning, which is what a lot of drugs do. So I always knew something was wrong. But when I started seeing patients and seeing that really all that was happening was managing the symptoms, suppressing the symptoms, never, ever trying to get to the root cause. And people left, not as close to death as they'd come in, but not healed, not better. And you knew they were going to come back a few months later. So that was a moment of intense disillusion. I nearly left. I nearly gave up, but I gritted my teeth and continued. And there was another moment that really stands out for me on the wards towards the very end in the transition from being a medical student to being a junior doctor. It's a young lorry driver, I think 40, 41 years old, brought in after a major heart attack. And I said to the consultant, because I still hadn't learned not to ask this question, I said, why, sir, has he had this heart attack? And the patient was listening carefully. And the consultant said, I kid you not, in a huge hospital in the north of England, a temple of science, the consultant said, act of God. No, I'm remembering it slightly wrong. It wasn't me that asked, it was the patient. The patient said to the consultant, sir, why has this happened? And the consultant said, act of God, my man, act of God. In other words, pure chance, nothing to do with the man's lifestyle, that he was sitting down all day, every day in the cab of the lorry. He was breathing in poisonous, toxic fumes. He was dealing with a huge stress of being on the motorway and no way of letting that stress out with physical exercise. And we know now that all these are serious factors in heart disease. But I thought, no, it's not an act of God. There are reasons. And afterwards, I went back and chatted to the man and told him what little I knew then. I did know a little bit even then, I don't know how, about lifestyle and diet and, perhaps even thinking about a change of career where he wasn't sitting still all day breathing in fumes. So that made a big impression. But the really light bulb moment was in the late 90s when I met the people from the British Society of Ecological Medicine and saw that there was a different way to do medicine. There was a different kind of doctor you could be. And of course, then I met nutritional therapists and naturopaths. It tied in with all that, particularly herbal medicine. I'd met all these people, but I hadn't joined the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. So I was wildly excited. I did their 2-year training. I sat in with all the most senior people, which is a really important way to learn. You've got to sit in on people's consultations. And the last 10 years of my practice, because I have retired now to focus on writing more books, but the last 10 years of my clinical practice, I always had somebody sitting in with me to learn. Occasionally a medical student or a medic, usually a nutritional therapist or a naturopath. And that was lovely.
Why? So, I often speak about this similar concept as well, where people, the kind of way you're taught is symptoms, disease, drug, and that's kind of the system that we go for. Like you said, though, we even in general medical training, we do have all this background knowledge that we kind of learn at the early days that just kind of almost goes out of the window. It's only really used to help diagnosis rather than management plan. Yeah. That's a really
important point, because I actually liked the early stuff, the basic biology, particularly the biochemistry. And I asked the biochemistry tutor at the end of the course, what's the biochemistry for? How are we going to apply it? And he said, this is extraordinary. He said, oh, you won't use it unless you go into genetics and deal with very obscure metabolic diseases of childhood. And so, to my eternal heartbreak, I gave my biochemistry textbook to the Oxfam shop. And then when I discovered ecological medicine, the first thing I realized was, oh my goodness, you need that biochemistry. And I was totally rusty because I hadn't used it for 15 years. You need that biochemistry. And I have learned all the applications of it that I didn't learn in my medical training, because nutrition is biochemistry. And identifying and getting rid of environmental pollutants and toxins from the body is pure biochemistry. You need to know what an enzyme is and what it does. And if you're going to take nutrition seriously and not just go and get, a multivit from the chemist, you need to be able to measure and understand people's levels of nutrients. You need to learn what the minerals are doing in the body and what the vitamins are doing in the body and what the essential fatty acids are for. I mean, we learned none of that. I don't know about you, Max, but we had 1 hour of nutrition in 6 years. And that hour, I now know, was wrong.
Yes. It's funny, isn't it, that the significance of what we put in our body is never, we learned smoking's bad for you, too much booze is bad for you, but beyond that, it was very much so
we learned
ignored.
But in my medical school, all the medics drank and smoked.
That's true as well.
Beer in the evening, and vast amounts of cheap coffee in the morning. I mean, it was. Yeah. There was no concept of physician heal thyself at all.
No. Why do you think? Why? I mean, there's obviously a lot of, you see online, there's a lot of conspiracy theories as to why doctors are kind of trained in this way, in terms of it serves the pharmaceutical industry, that we are very prompt in prescribing medication, rather than, you say, as you rightly point out, actually delving into, I suppose, more of a, I don't know, the word would be holistic approach in terms of all aspects. Why do you think that? I mean, I often wonder, from a practical basis, is it just easier, quicker to practice like that modern medical sort of layout? That sort of, it fits into a 10-minute appointment. It fits into an A&E triage. This sort of whole.
I think that's right. It's self-perpetuating. It's intellectually lazy. It's very intellectually lazy. It's easy. Okay, so you have a list of diseases and you have a list of symptoms and signs. When you're taking a history, all you're trying to do is not get to the root cause of the problem or understand what's changed in this person's physiology. You're trying to fit the person into a category, right? So if they've got all the symptoms of X and all the signs, for your listeners, signs is different from symptoms, and signs means what you actually find on physical examination of the person's body. If the symptoms and signs fit disease X, then you might as well use an algorithm. It is algorithmic because disease X, we know the treatment is drugs Y and Z. And therefore, as the president of the BSEM, Dr. Damien Downing, said recently, diagnostic labels stop doctors thinking. They completely stop them thinking because, you've got your algorithm, you've got your nice guidelines, you know that this is X, you give them Y, end of story, and you don't ask why. And it also doesn't allow for the fact that one person with disease X might actually need quite a different treatment approach from another person with disease X. Right? I mean, you and I would do this in our practice, but there is no way to do personalized medicine if you're trapped in that diagnostic system, which is really no more than taxonomy. It's categorizing. It's not deeply understanding, and so it doesn't lead to healing. Now, you said that, some people say it's all to do with the power of drug companies. I think increasingly it is. They are making billions and squillions from drugs, and they want everyone to take drugs. And I've had many, many patients, elderly people particularly, on 9 or 10 different drugs. And you send them back to their GP with a simple request, would you be kind enough to review this gentleman's medication? And actually, even the GP will go through it and say, you don't need that one. You don't need that one. And they'll take them off 5 out of 10 drugs instantly without saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry I left you on that drug for 10 years with no review and for no need. So it is partly the power of the drug industries. The power of the drug industries was very visible when I was in medical school. In the late 70s, early 80s, they would invite you to the occasional drug lunch, where they'd give you a meal that was from a different universe from the food you got in the hospital canteen. So, of course, you'd be in a good mood. They'd play you a film about their latest blood pressure lowering drug. They'd play lovely music. I remember one in particular where they were distorting Vivaldi, and Vivaldi was turning in his grave, but it was soothing. They made it into soothing music so that, you would associate the name of that drug with a lovely lunch and nice soothing. But that was obvious. That was unsubtle. I think their influence now is much greater, much more pervasive, but much less obvious. An awful lot of what passes for medical education is simply drug company advertising. And when the drugs are against the law, we call them drug cartels, and governments go after them with guns. But this is perfectly legal. But I mean, even in conventional medical journals, you'll find that the second or third leading cause of death in the Western world is drug side effects. So this is pretty serious. And if you look through the drug book, like the BNF or MIMS, there's no drug that hasn't got side effects. And some of them have serious side effects. And they're there in the small print on the leaflet when people get their prescription. But to be fair, doctors don't know the alternatives. They have been trained from the age of 18, straight from school, where they have not done humanities and they've not read novels and they've not got a breadth of experience of human life on this planet. They've just done physics, chemistry, and either maths or biology. And there they are, first day of medical school, being told, we are going to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And everything that comes from outside this institution is lies. And that's why, even the medical students I teach cannot hear anything from outside of the establishment. So it's partly drug company influence, but it's partly just the inertia and the rigidity that takes place in any institution that is as old as medicine is. I
think you think about the other aspect to it as well, because often, you think about human nature on different levels. And I was guilty of this in general practice as well, is even that desire for a lot of doctors who go into it to help people. Sometimes that feeling of, well, let's say you've got a high blood pressure and if you give them this pill, then their blood pressure will all of a sudden look better. Then you almost think like you're fixing something. Not only is it easy, it's very quick. And so it speaks to your human nature as well, that you think that you're fixing an issue very quickly, rather, like you said, looking at more of a global picture of the individual and the environment. It actually tweaks our human sort of instinct to try and help other people, which is misled, but it's appealing.
Well, it's a good human instinct to help, but the temptation of the quick fix is very strong. And actually doing holistic or integrative or ecological medicine is much harder work for the doctor and for the patient. Right? Because you can't just take a pill. I would spend an hour and a half going through that person's history from just before they were conceived, right? How was their mother? What was she exposed to? What was the birth like? Did she breastfeed? All of that, right through childhood, diet, life, everything up to the present day, to figure out why the person's blood pressure had gone up and think, what is it that raises the blood pressure? On the mechanistic level, it's the smooth muscle of the arterioles, the tiny blood vessels, constricting. Why would they constrict? Well, they definitely constrict if there's magnesium deficiency, because magnesium and calcium are in balance. Calcium makes smooth muscle constrict. Magnesium makes it relax. So there's magnesium deficiency, but there's also stress, and there's a vicious circle there because stress depletes your magnesium. And when you're low in magnesium, your muscles tense up. That feeds back to the brain that it's a tense, stressful situation. So you need to break that situation of stress and low magnesium, both by psychological therapies, relaxation techniques, meditation, and by giving the person lots of magnesium. And you need them to have loads and loads of exercise because that lowers the blood pressure. And guess what? If you do celery juicing, you put some celery in your vegetable juice, that lowers the blood pressure as well. And no, I can't quote you a peer-reviewed study on that, because who's going to fund it? It's not in anybody's interest. But clinical experience says that celery juice helps, combined with exercise and all the other things. But that's hard work, isn't it? That requires the patient to do a lot of stuff, and the doctor to review in 6 weeks' time and 12 weeks and see how it's going. It's harder work, but it means that they're not going to be on a second drug in 5 years' time, plus a third drug in 10 years' time, plus drugs to deal with the side effects of the first 3 drugs.
Yeah. Like the girl who swallowed the fly. Exactly. It kind of ends up being chasing your tail a little bit.
Exactly. Polypharmacy.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there which I think is key, and this is the same in the work we do, even with regard to hormone replacement, is that it's a double-sided relationship. So we're not giving people things that will cure all, and they have to meet the treatment halfway, is the way that you like to put it. So exactly like you said, to improve blood pressure, you can advise on the things that they should consider taking. But alongside that, there are things that they have to do on a regular basis to fix the underlying problems. And that's the other, I suppose, barrier we've got, is the dual responsibility. You've got to do your end of the scale, end of the job. You've got to work out why this has happened, which is kind of the doctor side of the equation. But then the patient has to take some responsibility at their end to actually work with what you're telling them to do, which again, I think is another barrier in this kind of time-constrained model that we have in modern medicine.
It's a barrier for some patients, because just as doctors have been indoctrinated to think that they're gods, patients have been indoctrinated to be completely passive in the face of their illness and simply do what the doctor tells them and take what the doctor gives them, but they expect it to be one pill. We're not, as a general public, conditioned expecting to be active participants in our own healing. And, in my world, that includes reading and learning, as well as, doing things that can be quite challenging. I mean, when I'm detoxing people, they need to do organic vegetable juicing, they need to do saunas, maybe colonic hydrotherapy, Epsom salts baths, as well as taking supplements, changing their diet, doing lots of good exercise. I mean, there's a lot of things you have to do, but it's our lifestyles that have made us sick. And, if sickness takes 10, 20 years to develop, you're not going to fix it in 10 minutes.
Yeah. And you've got to, like you said, I like to put it in the way that you can't assume that you're going to stay and maintain good health without actually putting in effort on your end. It's not a given that you will make it to 85, 90 without any health issues, unless you're actively, both mentally and physically, actually have a plan to maintain that health. It's not like our bodies, especially in this environment with our lifestyles and things, will naturally maintain good health as we age.
I think that's right. And I think it's particularly true after the age of 35. You can get away with an awful lot of bad living until 35. And then something switches, and suddenly maintaining your physical health becomes a thing. It becomes a project. It becomes a priority, and not something you can take for granted. Of course, when you hit 50, even more so. When you hit 70, even more so. I think that doesn't come naturally to most of us because, as hunter-gatherers, which we were for most of our evolutionary history, we didn't have to think about it. We picked from the trees, we picked roots from the ground, we picked nuts and seeds, and what was there to eat was good for us. We didn't have to think, what shall we eat? Because you ate what was in season and fresh and local. It was all organic. It just grew. And you killed an animal from time to time to get the good fats, the vitamins A, D, E, and K, the protein, and just about everything else you needed, which lasted until the next hunt. So, and we are still hunter-gatherers. That's why people drop litter, because you could drop a banana skin on the forest floor and it would do no harm. It would just compost. So, we were hunter-gatherers for 99.999% of the time we've been on this planet. And we still are, in a sense. So we haven't quite adapted. And therefore, thinking, what shall I eat? I should eat this, I shouldn't eat that, doesn't come naturally. But we're living in a world where it's become essential. But it is hard for us to even make it something that we think about. So I don't blame people for finding it difficult to put this kind of thing into practice. And I would say one really important example with huge impact on our health of our evolutionary heritage is to do with sugar, right? Sugar is addictive. Everybody loves something sweet, except some alcoholics, but almost everybody loves something sweet. Now, why is that? Because firstly, breast milk is sweet. So that sweet taste is associated from day one with love and comfort and safety. But also because when we were hunter-gatherers, we had very, very little access to anything sweet. Very rarely honey from bees, if you were brave enough to climb up the tree and get stung by the bees. But mostly it would be berries or fruits in season. And even in the tropics, they're not in season all year. So occasionally there would be a few fruits and berries. And in temperate latitudes, that would be in the autumn, and people would stuff themselves with fruit to lay down a layer of fat to see them through the winter when there would be very little food available. So we are still programmed to crave that sweet stuff, but the sweets we have available, the sweet stuff we have available now, every supermarket, every garage, every corner shop, is vastly more concentrated sugar than you would have got in primitive fruit trees. I say even the fruit that's grown now is selected to be far too high in sugar. And when I was in the 1970s, I remember seedless grapes were so sour, it was really hard to eat them. Now they're incredibly sweet. They've been bred to be like that because it's addictive. But what I'm getting at is its addictive nature is natural because nature has programmed us to go for the sweet stuff because that had tremendous survival value in a world where food was very scarce and only available intermittently. We have those same hunter-gatherer urges to go for the sweet stuff, but it's available 24/7 in a very, very concentrated form. And in that way, it's dangerous. It's rotting our teeth. It's giving us diabetes. It's making our kids obese. But as I explain, actually in the introduction to my first book, Staying Alive in Toxic Times, there's no point beating ourselves up. We are programmed to crave it. And the only way to not eat it is to not have it in your house. You know, if you have biscuits in your cupboard, you'll eat them. If you don't, you probably won't. You know, and if you give kids fruit or carrot sticks, which are very sweet, as a treat, and you don't give them loads of, donuts and ice cream and sugary crap, then their taste buds will adjust. And actually, I've worked with a lot of kids on this. Within 2 weeks, you can adjust their taste buds back so they regain their sensitivity. And I've had little kids sit in my consult room and say, Dr. Jenny, I tried red peppers and they're really sweet. You know, you learn to taste the sweetness in an onion, a red pepper, or courgette, which you could not taste when you were living on donuts and concentrated sugar. And even packaged savory food like ready meals was meant to be salty. It's got salt and sugar in it. Okay, so a big sugar is doing very nicely out of that addiction. There are ways of breaking it, but beating ourselves up and feeling guilty is not one of them, because evolution programmed that into us when we were living in an utterly different environment in which it made sense. It's that that survival mechanism has now become a liability in a world of chocolate and sweets. And
I think you find that I suppose a lot of people listening and myself included, you realize how quickly and dramatic some of your taste bud changes can be in a very relatively short space of time. Like I've never been a particularly sweet treat kind of person, but once you go a few weeks without having one and then you do eat it, you think, blimey, that tastes a lot sweeter than it did 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And so
exactly,
you can certainly experience the change in a relatively short period of time.
You can retrain taste buds, and you can retrain them also by eating foods that are the opposite, like grapefruit or dark green leafy vegetables or blackcurrant, something that's sour or bitter. And if you can learn to love that, you will also be less hooked by sugar. Yeah.
We should touch upon as well, you mentioned about the environmental changes in terms of these toxins and chemicals. Explain a little bit about what's going on there in terms of for the listeners then, in terms of what has changed in terms of what we're being exposed to. So we obviously know about the diet, the lifestyle side of it. There's obviously altered massively since what our body is actually designed for.
Yeah.
What's happened on the environmental exposure side of the equation, which is obviously new to us as well, relatively speaking?
Yes. Basically, the Industrial Revolution began in Britain, and it began in the late 1700s. So no more than 250 years ago, say 200 years ago even, when they started to build factories, use coal to power steam, manufacture stuff, and manufacture chemicals. And the Industrial Revolution has led, by the middle of the 20th century, had led to about 100,000 synthetic chemicals being released into the environment, from factory chimneys, now from the internal combustion engine, from tires, from brakes, from energy power stations, whichever way you generate your energy. And some people say, no, it's about 1 million synthetic chemicals. So just want to clarify this. About 100,000 new artificial chemicals have been deliberately manufactured, but they combine with each other in the air and the water and the soil. And that's why we've actually got hundreds of thousands, because, not all of them are planned or anticipated. Now, how many of them have been tested for their safety in the human body? Virtually none. Virtually none of them. But, if you're spewing the fumes into the air, we're breathing them in. If you're releasing the toxins into the earth and the water, then they end up in the soil and therefore in the food that is grown in the soil. We've been mining for a lot longer, actually. And so heavy metals are being released into the soil, into the rivers, into the sea, into the fish, into us when we eat the fish, and so on. So when I say we're not separate from the planet, I mean it quite literally. These pollutants have found their way into the air, the water, the soil, and the food. And what we need to do to protect ourselves is first and foremost to know where they are. What are the sources in our daily lives? And that's why I wrote the second book, Getting Healthy in Toxic Times. And I should probably point out that the title was chosen by the publishers. I wanted to call it What's Got Into You? What's got into you? With subtitle, How Pollution is Damaging Our Health and What We Can Do About It. So first thing we can do about it is to know. So we need to know that the vast majority of our agriculture has been industrialized, and that they are spraying pesticides all over our green and pleasant land, all over the fields. Pesticides are petrochemicals, as are plastics and synthetic fabrics and synthetic cosmetics and so on. These are all petrochemicals. And the pesticides were originally nerve gases used in the First and Second World War. And they are neurotoxic because that's how they were, chemically designed. But come 1945, there was no further use for them. And the manufacturers decided to repurpose them and use them initially as insecticides, then fungicides, herbicides, and so on. And there are thousands of these. They're very toxic. They are particularly linked with prostate cancer, with breast cancer, and with neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease. And they are massive endocrine disruptors in both men and women. In women, we know they're associated with cancer of the endometrium, that's the lining of the womb, and of the ovary, as well as of the breast. And, there are so many studies. When I was writing that book, I knew this from my clinical experience because I've had countless patients with those diseases who measured very high when we tested their pesticide levels. And as we got the pesticides out of their system with a year or so of detox, their symptoms improved. But I wanted what's called, RCTs, randomized clinical, double-blind, blah, blah, placebo-controlled trials. And I wanted studies from proper pucker peer-reviewed journals. And I thought I need to find half a dozen of these to justify what I'm saying. But actually what I found, as soon as I looked, was not half a dozen, but thousands, tens of thousands of peer-reviewed, proper, respectable academic studies linking pesticide exposure to all these diseases. And in particular, those who work directly and closely with the pesticides as pesticide applicators have a disproportionate level of prostate cancer. Now, I think there are other causes. I think iodine deficiency may be a contributing factor. I think zinc deficiency may be. And certainly, if your mobile phone is on and in your pocket, you are irradiating your prostate, and you're also irradiating your testes or your ovaries if you're a woman, your colon, and your bladder. And cancer in all those organs is going up, and particularly among young people. A young man came up to me recently. He was 34 and he'd just been diagnosed with end-stage prostate cancer. Now, this was unheard of 30 years ago. Prostate cancer was a disease of the elderly, and it didn't usually kill people. They usually died of something else in their 90s, and it was found at autopsy. So something is going on. Okay, so pesticides is part of that picture. The other thing that's being sprayed on the earth is another petrochemical, originally an explosive, but then repurposed, synthetic fertilizers, which give the plants nitrogen and phosphorus and a little bit of potassium. Now, these are minerals that I do not find people deficient in. What I find them deficient in is zinc, selenium, magnesium, all of these really vital minerals, which are not present in synthetic fertilizers, but the synthetic fertilizers make the crop plants grow so fast and so tall and spindly. They have very thin cell walls that they deplete the soil of what nutrients were in it. The pesticides will have killed the good bacteria in the soil, whose job is to fix the nutrients, and they will have killed the fungi, whose job is to feed the minerals to the plants, and the plants give them sugars in exchange. They utterly destroy the natural living ecosystem within the soil. So we're eating food that's grown without the good stuff and full of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. No wonder we're getting ill. So this is even before we think about junk food, even before we think about the ultra processed food industry, where even if the wheat was organic, which it isn't, but even if it was made from decent ingredients, the manufacturers have turned it into something that's just about edible, but you couldn't call it food. But even if you row back from that and think about people who are consciously eating their broccoli, if that broccoli was grown in depleted soil and sprayed with pesticides, it could be doing you as much harm as good. What is the solution? The solution actually is really simple, and it is to eat strictly organically grown food. And if you're eating animal food, to make sure it is free range and totally humanely reared, as well as only fed on organic food. And if it has the Soil Association's logo, it's genuinely organic and it's got no pesticides and no junk in it. Now, I'm going to anticipate the reaction that this usually elicits, which is, it's only for the middle class, we can't afford it, and how do we know it's really organic? Okay, how do we know it's really organic? Because the Soil Association are really, really strict. They will not let it through if it doesn't meet their criteria. Okay, let's tackle the fact of it being expensive. Yes, it's true. It's a problem. It shouldn't be. And there are some wonderful charities in parts of Hackney and other London boroughs making fresh, locally grown, organic food available to the poorest in our society. But if you look deeper, it shouldn't be expensive. It should be cheaper, because the farmers are not using the pesticides and they're not using the fertilizers. But the government is subsidizing the monocrop industrial agriculture that is ruining our landscape as well as our health. And they're not subsidizing the human scale, organic, people-friendly farmers. We have to change that as consumers. Everyone who can afford to, which is 5/6 of the population, should be voting with their wallet, supporting the organic farmers, particularly at the farm gate and at farmers markets, but buying organic. And writing to your MP and saying, look, can you subsidise the organic farmers, government, please, instead of subsidising the chemical farmers? So that's one thing. But I think the most important thing is priorities, because in the 1950s and 60s, we spent 33% of our income on food. Now it's gone down to 8%. And we want food to be cheap. I don't want food to be cheap. I want it to be nutritious and humanely reared and free from chemical pesticides. If you're just in transition to organic and you feel you can't afford to buy everything organic, then check out the website of PAN UK. PAN is Pesticide Action Network, and they give you the list of the dirty dozen. That is the foods which are the most contaminated when they're not organically grown. It includes grapes, strawberries, lettuce, and I can't remember all the others. And they've also got a list of the, I think it's the friendly 15 or 15 that you need to worry less about. But I would say, if somebody comes to me and they're eating horrible poisoned battery farm chicken that's never been able to spread its wings, that's been in crowded, appalling factory conditions, these animals, their immune systems are so damaged by stress that they would get infections and die. So they give them routine antibiotics, low level, drip every day. You're eating the antibiotics if you're eating those chickens, and you're eating their stress hormones as well. Somebody's eating that kind of chicken 3 times a week and they say they can't afford organic. I say, do you know what? For the same money, or rather less, you could afford a free-range organic chicken once a week.
Mm-hmm.
Don't need it 3 times a week. Have less, but have organic, and you'll actually be saving money. And it's health insurance in the end. It is the best health insurance. So eating organic is one thing. Second thing is filtering your water, because unfortunately, all of these toxins that are in the soil find their way onto the water table. The water companies are really rubbish at removing them. But there's other things the water companies don't remove as well that get into water table. And that is the residues of drugs. Now, you may think you're not taking drugs. If you do take a drug, like anything else you swallow, you pee out the residue, finds its way into the water table, into the soil, into the food, and into the water coming out of your tap. But even if you're not taking any drugs, your next door neighbor may be, your next door neighbor's pets may be, and all the local farm animals that are not organic and that are on antibiotics, even on hormones. Hormones are prohibited, but they're not if you've imported your food from America. So all of that's getting into the tap water, right? So if you filter your water, you're avoiding the residues of drugs, hormones, antibiotics, pesticides, synthetic fertilizers. But you're also removing what is deliberately added to the tap water, and that is chlorine. Now, we know chlorine kills a lot of bugs. It doesn't kill all of them. It doesn't seem to kill the cryptosporidium, because there was a huge outbreak of that in the 90s in the United States, where they did have plenty of chlorine in the water. But there's another way of killing potentially dangerous bacteria in our water supply, and it's what they do in the Netherlands. They use a 2-stage system. They use a physical filtering system followed by ultraviolet light. And if you shine ultraviolet light in the water, it kills all the bugs. Isn't that a revelation? This has been known for hundreds of years. People with infectious diseases were sent to the tops of mountains to be in the sunshine. The TB sanatoria were based on the fact that the ultraviolet from sunlight is the best anti-infective, antimicrobial, antiseptic that there is. So the Dutch use ultraviolet. Their water is completely safe to drink, and there's no chlorine in it. Maybe that's why the Dutch are so tall. They're not drinking chlorine. I don't know. Okay, now in some parts of the country, they're putting fluoride in the water, and increasingly in all parts of the country. They have been doing this since 1964 in the Republic of Ireland and in Birmingham in the West Midlands. And I couldn't help noticing after some years in practice, I saw a lot of children with developmental disorders. I couldn't help noticing that the vast majority of these kids were coming from Birmingham and from the Republic of Ireland. And when I finally twigged what was going on and I started testing their urine levels of fluoride, they were sky high. And then I would test the urinary levels of iodine, and the labs would write to me and say, sorry, can you send another sample? We must have made a mistake because we couldn't find any iodine. And of course, the second sample would come back iodine level 0, because the fluoride pushes the iodine out. And if you remember your chemistry, the periodic table of the elements, right, you've got the halogens, group 7, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine. Chloride is necessary, but fluorine and fluoride are toxic. Chlorine is toxic. Bromine and bromide are toxic, but iodine and iodide are vital. They are vital for our bodies, for the thyroid, the breast, the prostate, the stomach. All the cells of the body need iodine. Okay, so the fluoride is pushing that out. And I was able to get some of these kids a lot better by pleading with their mums and dads to plumb in a water filter, giving them some iodine, and doing the standard detox measures that you do for most toxins, which we can come to later if you'd like to know. Now, we're told that fluoride is in the water to protect children's teeth from cavities. But we know that any effect fluoride has on teeth, it has by topical application, right, by putting it on. It doesn't have it by putting it into the bloodstream and basically flooding every organ of the body with fluoride, because we know it damages brain, bone, kidneys, ovary, thyroid, and more. And it's well documented in a book by Dr. Paul Connett from 2011 called The Case Against Fluoride. So even if it were true that it protected children's teeth, and I actually think the best way to protect children's teeth is to brush their teeth and keep them off the sugary foods. Even if it were true, the damage to other organs means it's not justified. And there's a recent court case in America which has shown really clearly that it lowers children's IQ by about 10 points at the legal level at which it is put in the drinking water all over America. And interestingly, nowhere in Europe, right? All over North America, nowhere in Europe. And unfortunately, we're following America's lead and putting it in our water. Now, you can look at the reasons behind it. Where's it coming from, all this fluoride? Well, it's a waste product of the phosphate fertilizer industry and also of the aluminium industry. Huge, powerful industries who have a waste disposal problem. There are more details of this in chapter 3 of Getting Healthy in Toxic Times. But yeah, it's not being really put in there for your benefit. It's solving a huge industry's waste disposal problem. And it's also good for the sugar industry, because they can say, oh, don't worry about little Johnny's teeth. He can eat sugar. The fluoride in the water will make his teeth hard.
Yeah.
It does make teeth hard, but it makes them more brittle. It makes bones hard and denser, but more brittle. And in postmenopausal women, it's a particular problem. The higher their fluoride intake, the greater their risk of fracture. So that's, a whole nother angle on the osteoporosis story. So that's water. But what else is in your water? PFAs, the forever chemicals, sewage if you're swimming in a river, and plastics, unfortunately, the microplastics from our hugely excessive use of plastics in the water, the soil, and the air. And in chapter 3 of the latest book, I do go into detail about how you can get the plastic out of your life. Very, very important to stop drinking water out of plastic bottles, stop wrapping your food in cling film, and to get the plastic out of your life in so many other ways. It's quite simple, actually. It can be done. I describe it in chapter 3, and there are also 2 wonderful little books. One's called Go Plastic Free. I can't remember the name of the other. It's by a Greenpeace campaigner. And they're both listed in chapter 3 of my book. Really thin, practical books. And if you get the plastic out of your life, you will at least stop putting it into your body, as long as you filter your water. And plastic is more or less the only thing we cannot detox, right? We can detox heavy metals. And there are methods I describe in both my books. You can get the mercury out, the aluminium, the nickel, the cadmium, even with some difficulty, the lead. We can get heavy metals out. We can get pesticides out. We can even get some of the air pollutants out. And we can get plasticizers out, right? The BPA type stuff and the phthalates, PHTH, phthalates. We can't pronounce them, but we can detox them. The one thing we can't get out is the micro and nanoparticles of plastic. And so what we have to do, stop buying plastic, and then the manufacturers will stop producing it and get it out of our lives. So the 7th chapter of the new book is about your home. It's called A Tour of Your House, because although there's not much you can do as an individual about the air pollution outside on the street, I mean, you can walk away, further away from the curb, you can take the back routes and so on, and you can campaign politically for decent, clean, green public transport so people will get out of their cars. but you can control the air in your house. You can control almost everything in your house. So in that chapter, I go through all the rooms, the cleaning chemicals in the cupboard under the kitchen sink, the toxic cosmetics in the bathroom cabinet, whether it's aftershave, deodorant, moisturizer, shampoo. All of them can easily be replaced with really safe, natural, organic, herbal alternatives. And I list many of them, but you can find them on the health and beauty pages of the Soil Association's website. Excuse me. So plenty of alternatives to the toxic cleaning chemicals and to the toxic stuff we're putting on the skin. And of course, the skin is the largest organ of the body. It's an absorptive surface. So whatever you put on your skin, it's going into your body, into your bloodstream, as surely as if you had put it in your mouth. So you can change what's in your kitchen. You can change what's in your bathroom. You can change your pots and pans so you're not absorbing aluminium. You can change what you wrap your food in so you're not absorbing either aluminium from silver foil or plastic. And then if you move into the bedroom, you can look at your mattress. And if it's more than a couple of years old, it has probably stopped outgassing the toxic chemicals with which it was manufactured. It is really quite frightening to see what conventional commercial mattresses are made of. If you're buying a new mattress, buy an organic mattress. And this is much, much easier than it was even 10 years ago. There are plenty of options. And again, they're in the resources sections of the book for buying an organic mattress, because you're lying on that 8 hours a night. The chemicals in it are going in through your skin and you're inhaling them as well. So, open the bedroom window, and when you buy a new mattress, buy organic. And think about your wardrobe, because a lot of people are worried about moths eating their clothing. But the stuff that we use conventionally to protect against moths, those little purple mothballs, that's paradichlorobenzene. And it's extremely toxic insecticide, which I find when I test the sickest people, there's always paradichlorobenzene in there. And guess what? You can use lavender oil. You can use natural essential oil of lavender. Best get it organic. And Green Fibers of Totnes do a moth spray that's a combination of lavender oil and neem oil. That's NEEM from the neem tree in India, a herbal remedy that's been used for all sorts of parasites for thousands of years. The neem does smell horrible. The lavender covers it up. But the moths think that the lavender smells horrible as well as the neem. And it gets rid of them. You spray a bit of lavender oil in your clothes. You don't need the toxic mothballs. And then we need to think about soft furnishings, because as well as mattresses, you've got your sofas, your cushions, your curtains, and your carpets. Again, if you're buying old, it's not, if you've got old or you've bought secondhand, it's not an issue. But if you're buying new, please be careful, because synthetic furnishings, by law, have to be impregnated with flame retardants. Now, why? Why are they flammable? Because the synthetic materials that they're made of are essentially petrochemical, made to burn. And therefore, they have to be impregnated with these anti-fire chemicals, these flame retardants, which are, listen carefully to the name, polybrominated biphenyls or polybrominated diethers, right? So PBDEs, polybrominated diethers, or PBPs. Polybrominated means they've got lots of bromine in them. It's a toxic halogen, just like chlorine, just like fluoride. And you're inhaling that when you're stretching out on your sofa for a nice relaxing evening. Again, don't worry if it's old, open the windows, but when you're buying new carpets and sofas, it is now possible to get them made of safe, natural materials. And to save you doing all the research from scratch, there is a list of sources, I think, in the resource section at the back of the book. So all of that means we are empowered to change our lives by changing our homes. And it's transformative for people's health. I mean, I once actually stopped somebody's migraine by persuading her to stop spraying air freshener around her house. Now, it's very rarely as simple as that. Migraine is usually really complicated. But air fresheners are completely toxic. If you're puffing that around your house, it's going into your lungs, your eyes, your children's lungs, your children's eyes. And you might want to row back and ask yourself, why does the air in my house need freshening? Just empty the bins and open the windows. And if you still want a nice smell, you can burn natural essential oils. So you can get some oil, lavender, jasmine, frankincense, lemongrass. There's all sorts of wonderful smells, geranium. And you just get a little beeswax tea light and put it at the bottom of a ceramic burner, put some water on the top and a few drops of essential oil, light the beeswax candle, and you've got a lovely gentle light and a lovely gentle smell. And don't use the scented candles that you can buy because they're also full of toxic chemicals. So it's a bit of a minefield. And I would say don't try to make all the changes at once. And I say this in the book, just make one change a week, take it slowly, because every change will make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think things are improving in terms of awareness and options? I've certainly noticed that over the last few years, there is more self-care products that advertise the fact that they avoid these chemicals and things like that. Have you seen that?
Yes, I do think awareness is growing, but I think you have to be a bit wary. And if you're buying a new product, take your magnifying glass, because, for example, it's perfectly legal to advertise a shampoo as being organic. But by law, you can do that if it contains only 1% organic ingredients. Not like that with food. The legislation around food is much stricter. But with cosmetics and non-food products, you can claim it's organic if it's even 1%. And that is ridiculous. So how do you find out if it's really organic? 2 ways. One is you look for the appropriate label, right? If it's fabric, if it's clothing, you look for GOTS, which is Global Organic Textile Standards. That means it's really organic. If it's a cosmetic produce, you look for COSMOS, which is the International Organic Cosmetic Certification. And the Soil Association logo is also a complete guarantee. The Soil Association is part of COSMOS, right? So if it's got that label, it's safe. But before you even go shopping or before you even shop online, go to the website of the Soil Association and look at their health and beauty pages. Anything they list is safe. Anything on the COSMOS or the GOTS website is safe. But you have to be very careful because the manufacturers know we're getting wise. So, for example, BPA, bisphenol A, which is a toxic additive put in plastic to make it soft and squidgy. A lot of products these days say BPA free, meaning it hasn't got any bisphenol A in it, but it might have bisphenol B, C, D, E, F, etc., all the way to Z. So just because it hasn't got BPA in it doesn't mean it hasn't got another bisphenol in it, which will be just as toxic, because every time the manufacturers get called out and the toxicity finally gets proven, the manufacturers say, oh, sorry, that was toxic. Our mistake. My bad. Go back to the lab. We'll make a different version. Invariably, the different version has hardly been tweaked at all and does the same kind of damage to our bodies, which, as we said at the beginning, are not evolved to cope with these. Some people cope better than others. We are genetically different, and some people's liver detox enzymes are really strong and effective, and others are not. So the people who are made most ill by our post-industrial, chemically contaminated world are those who end up with multiple chemical sensitivity, and I call them the canary people because they're like the canaries down the mine. They're getting ill first, but we'll all get there eventually. Okay, one elephant in the room we haven't mentioned really is electromagnetic radiation. Right, so that's physical rather than chemical poisoning. It's energy rather than matter. It's wavelengths, frequencies of radiation given off by your mobile phone, your Wi-Fi router, Bluetooth, the cell phone towers or mobile phone masts that sprung up everywhere recently. And those are all irradiating us with frequencies that we were not evolved with. They're nowhere near the natural frequencies, which are good for us, visible light, ultraviolet and infrared. The only way to be back in touch with the electromagnetic field of the earth with which we evolved is to go and stand barefoot on the grass. Now, we're recording this in mid-November, and the weird and wonderful warm weather has just vanished, and it's about 4 degrees out there. I'm not going to go and stand barefoot on the grass when it's 4 degrees. There is a good compromise, actually. You put your hands on the grass, and it's not so painful, and you can quickly run in and put them under the warm tap. But seriously, in our homes, we are bombarded by frequencies that one researcher, Dr. Deborah Davis in America, thinks are 1 trillion times stronger than what we evolved with. And, you take an autistic kid out of the house and into the forest, they calm down instantly. And it's the same for all of us, actually. If we're out in nature, away from the mobile phone mask, away from our devices, which are designed to be highly addictive, we feel better. And yet, chapter 6 of the book, Getting Healthy in Toxic Times, goes into a lot of detail about the evidence that it's not just that this electromagnetic radiation makes us feel hyper or gives us a headache or makes us feel sick or gives us brain fog. It's actually causing very serious illness. It's contributing to Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative conditions, and it's contributing to the rather frightening epidemic of brain tumors among young people, particularly young men.
That was incredible. That's going to be very useful, I think, for people listening in, because I think the problem for a lot of people is, I think, like you said, awareness is improving, but I think a lot of people don't even know where to start. So that's kind of a stepwise approach that people can listen to and actually say, right, well, this is what. And you've done some highlighted some sources of resources of information there as well.
But also important to say, you don't have to ditch your devices completely. You don't have to stop being in contact with your friends and colleagues. There are ways to use this technology safely. There are protective cases you can get from your mobile phones. There's all sorts of ways you can adjust the technology as well as moderating your use of it. So you don't have to ditch it, but you do have to be aware that it presents a hazard. And the most basic thing is, do not touch it to your head and do not carry it in your pocket touching your body unless it's completely switched off. That's OFF, not just airplane mode. Off, off, off.
Yeah. So tell people where to. That's been very useful, and I think we could probably talk for about 5 hours on this topic because it's got so many avenues you can delve into. Tell people where they can find, because I think a lot of people listening to this will probably be like thinking, where do I get these books from? Because
that's very kind of you. Okay, so the different publishers. The first one is called Staying Alive in Toxic Times, a seasonal guide to lifelong health, because as well as nutrition, it's about living in harmony with the seasons, living and eating in accordance with the seasons. That's published by Yellow Kite, which is an imprint of Hodder, and you can get it anywhere, any bookshop, or via my website, drjennygoodman.com. That link, there's links there in under my books, which takes you straight to it.
Yeah.
That was 2020. My 2024 book is called Getting Healthy in Toxic Times, an ecological doctor's prescription for healing your body and the planet. And it's a hideously clunky subtitle, not my choice. That's published by Chelsea Green, who I should say are actually a wonderful publishers. They are. And again, you can find details on drjennygoodman.com or any bookshop or any online retailer. I would urge you to use an ethical online retailer rather than the very, very large one that treats its employees appallingly. But most of all, I would suggest you go into a real physical bookshop. You need your support.
And you said you've retired from clinical. You're focusing on your writing nowadays. Is that right?
Retired. Yeah, I mean, I'm very nearly 69. And I have retired from clinical practice, but I have a long list of wonderful colleagues. So you shouldn't feel disappointed if you're thinking, oh, I want to go and see that doctor. I have a list, and it's on my website, of colleagues who do the same kind of work. Right. I'm not the only one who does this kind of holistic medicine at all, but I'm one of the relatively few who have a passion to transmit the information to the general public. And I actually feel I can help more people. I could see 4 or 5 people in a day and change their lives, but tens of thousands of people have read the books. And so I feel I'm changing more lives, and I want to empower people. because the book costs vastly less than even one consultation with someone like myself. So that's how I'm trying to empower people to take their health into their own hands. And, yes, there's a lot of hazards around us, but there's loads we can do about it once we have the knowledge.
Absolutely. Knowledge gives you that power and potential freedom from it all.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Jenny Goodman, very many thanks for joining us. I think it's been exceptionally useful and interesting. And for everyone listening, go check out the books there.
Thank you, Dr. Max. It's been a pleasure.